Obamacare. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Stupid people are ruining America.
The president just wants to take care of you. He just doesn't think you're able to do it for yourself.
There's a very thin line between communism, progressivism, Marxism, socialism.
The empire will strike back.
You still don't know that this was political.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of America Our Way. I am your host, Dustin Hoyt. I want to have a somber conversation tonight. It's come to my attention that a lot of people my age, a lot of listeners out there, younger listeners, aren't really aware of some of the big news that's been touted out there, or some of the older headlines that have been used, and they just don't know the stories, and it's because we don't teach pseudo-modern history in American schools these days, and a lot of younger people, they have to go back and look it up for themselves, and more often than not, we don't have time or the interest or things like that, and a lot of it is really important because it kind of sets the tone for a lot of people on the right and the left these days. Specifically, stuff that's been brought up with the Cliven Bundy debacle. For those of you who haven't been paying attention to the news lately, and albeit it would have to be news online because you really won't hear about it anywhere else. Hannity and Glenn Beck have had Cliven Bundy on their program. He is a rancher out of Nevada, a place called Bunkersville, ironically. I'm not sure if I've mentioned him before, but he's been in a standoff with federal agencies, Bureau of Land Management, BLM, over his cattle grazing on quote-unquote public land. Now, the way this works is whenever states become states, any land that is, quote, not owned, meaning not privately owned, is basically up for grabs by one level of government or another. Now, more often than not, the federal government gets dibs. This is especially true, supposedly, when it comes to, say, Alaska. Something like 98% of the land is owned by the federal government. Now, it kind of blows my mind that Alaska, with its own state government, only owns 2% of the land, or it's privately held and held by the state government. But in a lot of cases, a lot of these places are dubbed national parks, and they're taken over by the federal government. And anytime you have a species that's put on an endangered list or anything like that, it becomes federally regulated. And I don't know about you, as a small government guy, it really irks me that the federal government owns such large percentages of states. And it should bug you too, I think. I think anybody with good sense is disturbed by the notion that the federal government owns most of their state. Now, I thankfully live in Texas, where it's less than 5% the federal government can claim, and I think it's as it should be. You know, that accounts for parks, maybe lakes that are designated parks, but even then, the state government steps in and says, you know, go home, Washington, we don't need you here. And I don't understand why the federal government owns such large tracts of land in other states, because quite frankly, if it's uninhabited, if it's public land, quote unquote, if it's unowned, there's no reason why somebody shouldn't be able to walk out there and stake a claim. There's no reason why people shouldn't be able to live out there and use the land as they see fit if it's not occupied. I mean, that's how it worked in the West. I mean, pioneers would go out there and they'd stake a claim, you know. Homesteaders would go out there, mark off some lands, this is my home. And we recognize that as lawful in our country. And for whatever reason now, we've got this deed and property system where it's practically impossible to buy land from the federal government, impossible to buy land from the state government, because they don't want to, I mean, land is a fixed resource on the planet. And so with the federal government owning these large tracts, I think that's problematic because, you know, I also disagree with government really owning much of anything. But that has been the center of the Cliven Bundy issue. Cliven Bundy is a rancher, and his cattle have been grazing on public land since 1870, if I'm not mistaken, 10 years after Nevada became a state. Now, the land was uninhabited. There were a bunch of ranchers there in the past, previously, that had used this land to graze their cattle. Because, quite frankly, if you've got a large amount of cattle, you can't really keep them grazing on a 100-acre property. It's from everything I've read, it's just not feasible from an agricultural standpoint, and it's not cheap to upkeep that land. But when the public, quote unquote, the government owns 1,000 acres nearby, you can just head the cattle out there and eat some of the brush and then move them back to your own land. It's you get to send them out there to graze from time to time, and it saves millions of dollars in feed costs, if not hundreds of thousands. And that's what Cliven Bundy his family's been doing since 1870. Now, the Bureau of Land Management was formed nearly 100 years after that, if not more than 100. And it was formed in the early 1900s. So his family had been there not quite 100 years before the Bureau of Land Management was formed. And the federal government stepped in the 90s and started saying that he needed to pay federal grazing fees. He had been paying county and state grazing fees, but he refuses to pay the federal government because he says the government can't own this land. His family's been using it since 1870. What right does the government have to step in and say, oh, by the way, we own that. You're going to have to pay us grazing fees. Now, there used to be a significant amount of cattle ranchers that would use this land for their livestock to feed on. And since the government has stepped in, they've basically regulated them out of the area. Now, a part of it is also, metropolitan growth. So, a lot of the ranchers have just gone out of business or moved to the city and stuff like that. So that is a contributing factor. How much, I have not looked into the demographics of the area enough to know that. And I'm not about to do a graduate level research project to make that happen. But needless to say, Bundy has said that the government is regulating him out of his own livelihood. And that's very feasible when you look at what's going on. They are alleging that over the course of 20 years, since he hasn't paid his federal grazing fees, that he has raked up over $1 million in fees and late fees and fines and things like that. Now, Bundy's gone to court several times with these people, and the judges have all ordered him to pay the fees. And, of course, the judges have to look at federal law, and the federal law says that he has to pay. So it is what it is. Now, Bundy has flat out said that it's not about whether or not he broke the law. It's civil disobedience because he does not believe that the federal government has the right to tax him on using this land. It's Nevada, and he has no problem paying the Nevada fees. And if you know anything about the cost of cattle, if you've got over 100 head, $1 million is not that big of a deal. It's a dent, but he can afford it. It's not a problem. So the grazing fees weren't really an issue. It's not like he couldn't afford them. He just refused to pay them on principle. So now understand that he is knowingly breaking federal law because he believes they do not have the right to charge him those fees. He believes that the state of Nevada should own that land and regulate it as such. Now, there is a desert box tortoise in the area that is now protected, and that's why the government is trying to basically push him out of this area, or why that they've taken an interest in this area. Funny thing, I've seen reports that the government actually has too many of these tortoises in the area they've set up, and so they've actually been euthanizing a bunch of them because there's too many. Too many protected tortoises that there aren't enough of. So they have to kill some of them. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either, but that's the argument, and they're sticking to it. Now, some people have come out and talked about this, some people haven't. Now, you've got Glenn Beck coming out and saying, be like Gandhi, be like Jesus, turn to God, etc. And he really thumps his Bible hard from time to time, and that's just how he is. But he's not wrong. Being peaceful is the most important thing, because anytime you have the government using excessive force, like shooting and killing people, it is an example of overreach. It shows, especially if you're not threatening. And that being said, you got a lot of people on the right who, after Waco and Ruby Ridge, have come out and they're armed. There's been a a strong response in the militia movement ever since those events. They've kind of snapped into place, and they're common. You had the freed folk up north, the free people or free men or whatever, that were arguing with the federal government that they weren't going to pay any taxes. They were claiming the land, and they were their own sovereign people, basically. Which is, a libertarian ideal. The federal government can't tax you directly because the federal government doesn't own you. And that's the whole argument. The federal government can only tax what it owns, so to speak, because if you're constantly paying taxes on something, how can you own it? For example, in layman's terms, a slave is someone who works and pays 100% of their, the fruits of their labor to whoever owns them. So at what percentage are you not a slave? What percentage of things, of fruit of your labor changes you from a slave to a freed person? Now, most would argue that 0 is the only number that can be applicable to a freed person, that you cannot pay income tax, so to speak, and be considered free. And this is much in line with what the Founding Fathers said. They rebelled over a tax on a breakfast beverage, and it wasn't even coffee, it was tea. So when you look at the whole scenario, it's the guy's not being that far-fetched. Saying that he needs to pay fees to the federal government on land that is in Nevada because of a turtle is ridiculous. And so I'm with him in that aspect, and I understand the civil disobedience, but unlike Patrick Henry, this guy's not, allowing the consequences to happen. And rightfully so in this case. I mean, it's not going to make him the Gandhi-esque hero, because obviously he's not letting them run all over him. He's, refusing. But in this instance, it gets kind of murky. You can't say that the guy is a true folk hero because he refused to pay the federal government something that they, are passed laws and such to make happen. I mean, so it comes down to either you believe the government has the right to pass laws to make you do things, or it doesn't. And in my perspective as a libertarian, I don't think that they do in many cases, because unjust laws should not be followed. I don't believe that unjust laws passed by the government are something you should follow. It's not mandated. It's not just. Any law that allows the use of force against an individual unprovoked is a violation of rights. And any law that's passed to violate rights is obviously unjust and therefore immoral and therefore wrong. The perfect example of this would be gay marriage. It doesn't make sense for the government to say who you can contract half your stuff to. And I've made this argument many times. You guys know it by heart by now. So there's been a lot of controversy with this because there's been, the protesters have shoved park rangers that were out there trying to enforce this, and one of them ended up getting tased, and a woman was pushed down by an agent, and a dog almost bit one of the protesters. That being said, the protesters were getting in their face and pushing them back, and the Bureau rightfully retreated because, these people are protesting, and they're protesting the fact that those federal agents are there, and they weren't posing any harm, so there's no reason for federal agents to be tasing and hurting them, when in reality it's the fact that the federal agents are there that's pissing them off. Now, there has been some controversy about something that was said. I've been in a few arguments about this online. You may have seen it, you may have not. Former Sheriff Richard Mack is one of the activists out there. He is a staunch supporter of the Bundys, and he said that women should be on the front lines as a tactic. And he's been catching a lot of heat for this from people on the left, and even some in the libertarian movement or on the right, and especially with some of the pro-cop people out there that are just, how dare you put women up front? And a lot of the people that are unknowingly sexist saying, how dare you put women in harm's way, women and children, that kind of thing. But the guy came out with a statement, and he said, this was in order to kind of redeem himself here. He said, "I would have been next. I would have been the next one to be killed. I'm not afraid to die here. I'm willing to die here. But the best ploy would have been to have had women in front because, 1, I don't think they would have shot them. 2, if they had, it would have been the best thing to show the rest of the world that these ruthless cowards will do anything they are told. If they are told to shoot, they will shoot. Just like when they shot Vicki Weaver when they blew her head off in front of her little girl while she was holding a baby. Now, for those of you who don't know what he's referencing Ruby Ridge, and we're going to have a nice long chat about that when we get back to the video.
Hey, this is Alfonso Rachel with 20 Pound Sledge and PJTV Zone Nation, and you're listening to VLR.
All right, we're back. Now, for those of you who know this story, the story of Ruby Ridge, I apologize, but you're going to get a refresher. You're going to get a history lesson. Now, a lot of people don't know this story, and I myself didn't know it till I did some looking into it this week, so I could, be able to present it to you people here tonight. Now, Vicki Weaver, who the Sheriff Mack referenced when talking about the Bundy Ranch, was one of the family members at Ruby Ridge in northern Idaho in '92. Now, the Weaver family moved up to Ruby Ridge area in northern Idaho in the late 80s, early 90s, because Vicki Weaver was a religious leader who believed that the world was corrupt. The apocalypse was coming, and she and her family moved out there to escape and homeschool the kids. They had 3 daughters, one of whom was 16 at the time of the raid that happened out there. One was a baby, and one was in the middle somewhere. She was married to Randy Weaver. Now, Randy Weaver was an Army engineer, retired, obviously. He's a vet. And there were some crazy allegations that happened with this whole thing. Now, I'm going to go through it as I can here. Now, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, ATF, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Idaho were all involved in this operation with the Weaver family. It all started when Randy Weaver, the husband, had a $3,000 land dispute with his neighbor. The neighbor claimed that that Randy Weaver threatened the president, the Pope, and the governor of Idaho when they were having this debate over the land. Now, the FBI and the Secret Service investigated those allegations. Now, in that investigation, they turned up that Weaver was friends with an Aryan, a member of the Aryan Nation. Now, Weaver appeared on... Oh, by the way, Weaver won that $3,000 land settlement, and the neighbor had to pay not only that fee, give the land up, but pay his $2,100 court fees. So Weaver won that dispute, so he wasn't just poking the bear out there. Now, Weaver got on the ATF radar when he met an informant at an Aryan Nation meeting, so the Aryan Nation ties were legit. Weaver allegedly sold 2 sawed-off shotguns that were, quote, illegal length to an informant, an ATF informant at an Aryan Nation meeting. Now, it's interesting to note that sawed-off shotguns of illegal length is the whole source of this thing, because apparently it's illegal for you to own a shotgun if you've sawed the barrel off, because apparently that's not safe for you to own as a defensive weapon. That's a constitutional issue right there, because it's stupid. The whole precedence behind the Heller case in the Supreme Court, the Second Amendment stuff, is that any weapon that is in regular use by the military, by infantry, basically, is considered something that could be used by an American citizen. So a lot of people say this is why people shouldn't be able to own bayonets. But in reality, the Marines all still have bayonets. Those of you in the military know exactly what I'm talking about. And they also have millions of sawed-off shotguns. That's an actual weapon that the U.S. military has stockpiled. So the whole argument there is moot, but let's move on. Now, Weaver got on the ATF radar, and he allegedly sold the 2 shotguns to the informant. Then, Weaver had a falling out with the Aryan Nation. He was no longer a part. So ATF popped him and said, "You need to be a snitch for us." And Weaver, who was naturally distrustful of the government for good reason, said, "No way in hell am I going to be a snitch." So the ATF charged him for the shotguns, and they also added some bogus claims that he was a bank robber. The grand jury indicted him for making and owning the sawed-off shotguns, but all the charges were dismissed as to the bank robbery because it was nonsense. Now, with this grand jury indictment for making and owning sawed-off shotguns that were of illegal length, obviously the whole thing should have been thrown out right there, but grand jury indicted him. Weaver did not know the time for court. He was appointed an attorney by the judge. He had no phone listed. They couldn't contact him. He did not contact the court. The defense attorney could never get in contact with him. And allegedly, he received some letter at one point due to a mix-up from the government, big surprise, for the wrong court date. Weaver never knew the time for court. He knew the wrong date. It was like a month later, the letter that he had gotten, allegedly. But the judge, and the defense attorney argued it and said, I haven't been able to get in contact with him, and the letter he received said March 30th. But the judge refused to recall a bench warrant for not showing up for court. So the grand jury hit him with failure to appear. Now, a magistrate told Weaver if he didn't appear, the government would take his land and give his kids to CPS, and it would leave his wife homeless. So this guy, who's naturally suspicious of the government, moved out to the woods because he thinks the world's going to end and it's corrupt, is told the government's going to take his land and kids. Not exactly the best situation there. It's a tinderbox, to say the least. Now, the government started observing the family, and they talked to a bunch of neighbors, and neighbors were like, well, if you go up there, he'll shoot you dead. He don't know who you are. And they never talked to the Weaver family themselves. It built up this whole profile on the Weavers that was completely skewed. No first-hand accounts were done by the psych workup people. Nothing like that. It was all completely botched, and that was turned up in internal investigations. So the government investigated itself and turned up that it messed up bad. But I digress. The Weaver family allegedly took defensive positions when vehicles appeared, and then when they saw the drivers, who they were, they would obviously stand down. But the threat that the Weaver family posed against the government was exaggerated. So the U.S. Marshals were trying to go in and get him for this grand jury indictment for not going to court for making and owning sawed-off shotguns, 2 of them. Now, Geraldo Rivera, apparently one of the biggest blunders on our country, sent a helicopter out there for one of his expose shows that he did, flew a helicopter over this guy's place, and then claimed that they fired shots at it. Now, ironically, U.S. Marshals were on the property at the time, installing cameras on this guy's property to observe him to find out how much of a threat he was. They said no shots were ever fired, but Geraldo's people say they fired 2 shots, that the wife and the husband each fired 1. That was never corroborated. That was never proved. It's just an allegation from Geraldo Rivera, of all people, so I don't believe it for a second. And the courts didn't believe it either. It was never in any documents. Government never said it happened. In fact, they have testimony saying it didn't. Now, a marshal, there was a whole thing where it was delayed because of a prosecutor getting elected or whatever, so everything was delayed for a while. The family thought that they didn't have to worry about this indictment anymore, that the government was just going to leave them alone. Big mistake, right? A marshal's operations team, recon team, these guys are soldiers in camo up in the woods, were observing the house from the cabin in the woods from 500 yards away. They threw rocks to see how the dogs would react because they wanted to know how dangerous the dogs were. They threw 2 rocks. Well, they spooked the dogs, and Sammy Weaver's son, young son, he's 16 or something at the time, and Kevin Harris, a friend, followed the dog thinking it was game, thought it was some meat. They were going to go hunting and get some food. They were running low. Well, the son and Kevin Harris followed the dog on this trail in the woods. The ops team retreated to this thing called the Wide Juncture. It was apparently a place where these 2 paths crossed. And Randy Weaver left as well, took a logging path, a separate path, was going to head him off or whatever, thinking, again, that it's like a deer or a bear or something, or a moose. They were up there in Idaho, so they could get moose, I don't know. So anyways, they encountered the marshals at the Y juncture. The op team shouted, U.S. Marshals, stop, or back off. That's what they testified. Randy cursed and retreated. Now, according to the official reports, nobody knows who fired the first shot, but what they do know is that the recon team shot the dog, and then Sammy, the young son, started shooting at them. 14-year-old Sammy was shot in the back and arm. He was shot in the arm and then shot in the back while retreating and killed. A Sergeant Major Deegan, a Marshal Deegan was shot and killed by Harris. And I've seen different accounts. One that he shot, Harris shot Deegan after the dog was killed or after Sammy Weaver was killed. Now, it's important to note that Harris was acquitted, said clear self-defense. We'll get into that later. The governor of Idaho declared a state of emergency in the county. Now, snipers went out there from the FBI. This whole joint task force of people went out there. And on August 22nd, the sniper said they had shoot-on-sight rules. Basically, if you see any of the Weaver adults, shoot them for any reason as long as you don't endanger the children. And if and only after negotiations have been started or something like that. I've seen both ways. Now, otherwise, all the other people, self-defense rules only. However, Ruby Ridge Rules of Engagement 1 and 2 basically said kill Weaver adults. Kill the mom and dad and any other adults on the compound, no matter if they're posing a threat. You don't have to feel that they're threatening you. Now, another round of negotiators were set to arrive in an armored truck. But before that happened, a sniper shot Randy Weaver in the back when he was going down to a cellar to visit the body of his dead son. Now, when that happened, Vicky Weaver and Harris were fleeing back into the house. Vicky Weaver was opening the door, holding it open from the inside. Harris was running inside the house. The sniper fired a shot through the door and killed Vicky Weaver, shot her in the head, and hit Harris as well. Excuse me, he fired a shot, the second shot, killed Vicky Weaver on the spot, and wounded Harris. Now this sniper, Lon Horiuchi, was an FBI sniper. He fired the shot through the door. He could have hit any of those kids in that house. So that, automatically violated even the ridiculous rules of engagement for this whole thing. Now, what's interesting is that on day 4 of the siege, FBI Deputy Assistant Director Danny Coulson released a memo. Now, this to me was the most damning and interesting piece of evidence that was submitted. It said, quote, something to consider. 1, charge against Weaver is bullshit. That's a direct quote. 2, no one saw Weaver do any shooting. 3, Vicky has no charges against her. 4, Weaver's defense. He ran down the hill to see what his dog was barking at. Some guys in camis shot his dog, started shooting him, killed his son. Harris shot Deegan. Weaver is in a strong legal position. Now, I don't know about you, but that's exactly what I got looking into this whole situation. If you hear your dogs barking, you're armed and follow them out thinking it's a bear, and you see a bunch of dudes with rifles and camouflage, you're probably going to start shooting too. I mean, if you've got strange military-style people on your property, you're probably going to shoot them. I mean, how many people would have soldiers in camo armed with night vision goggles and all that jazz on their property? Would you not shoot? I'd be worried they were coming to kill me and my family. I mean, you don't know who these crazy people are. Now, arguably, they did shout U.S. Marshals, but that still, what are they doing on the property? Why are they armed? And this guy's already paranoid of the government? I'm surprised he didn't try to kill all of them. Not to say that's the right thing to do, but, I mean, if that doesn't freak you out, I don't know what does. Now, on August 30th, civilian negotiators got Harris to surrender. This is 1992. Randy Weaver and the daughters surrendered the next day after officials threatened to send a SWAT team in and clean them out. Weaver was taken to court and was acquitted of all charges except for missing court and violating the terms of his bail. Now, how ironic is it that this guy had a full compound raid on his house. His family, his wife and son killed, and the only charge that sticks is that he missed a court appearance. I don't know about you, but my trust in government isn't exactly stalwart. Kevin Harris was also acquitted, which we talked about. The government paid the Weaver family $3.1 million in a wrongful death suit outside of court. Officials said there's no way in hell the government would have won that lawsuit. That's not a quote from me. That's a quote from the DOJ, that DOJ source that wanted to remain anonymous. Now, the sniper, Lon Horiuchi, was indicted for manslaughter, moved to federal court. They dismissed it on grounds of sovereign immunity. Basically, he's government. The Ninth Circuit Court overturned those charges, and then the state dropped them. The Attorney General basically said, I don't think we can prove anything after this long. The special prosecutor disagreed, saying that there's no guarantee that he couldn't have won. He thought he would have won that case, no problem. Kevin Harris was awarded $380,000 from the government in the form of damages. Now, they originally didn't want to pay him and said there's no way they would pay somebody that killed a U.S. Marshal. But again, sources have said that if they would have gone to full court, that Kevin Harris and the Weaver family would have gotten full awards, that there's no way the government would have won this case. And the U.S. Senate had like 15 days of hearings and basically found that the government was way out of line on all of this stuff. And it's a very, very real thing. And I don't know about you, but it's just absolutely terrifying that this is the kind of thing that happens. And this is what people are comparing the Bundy Ranch fiasco to, another Ruby Ridge, where the government's going in, overstepping its bounds, and using way too much force. We'll have more when we come back.
A progressive woman once told me that if she was my wife, she'd poison my coffee. I told her if I was her husband, I'd drink it. This is Alan Bordius, host of Their Finest Hour, Monday nights here on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Now that we've gone through our history lesson and talked a little bit about all of this Bundy stuff, I want to talk a little bit about elections coming up. Actually, scratch that. We'll talk about that later. I want to talk about guns, because we're already talking about the sawed-off shotguns. We're talking about the government blowing off the head of a woman who is holding her baby while shooting through a door. We've got them talking. We're talking about the Bundy Ranch having federal snipers out there and all this jazz. So we want to talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of gun rights. Now, Mayor Bloomberg, Nanny Bloomberg, has pledged $50 million into a new gun, quote-unquote, safety organization. He's calling the thing Everytown, and it's supposed to house Moms Demand Action and Mayors Against Illegal Action and other anti-gun groups, gun control groups. Now, this group is being touted in the media as counter-NRA and a grassroots organization. I saw this today on the wires in my professional life, and I, of course, was just aghast at the way it was being reported as just, we finally have a crusader coming along to defeat the evil NRA. And, even in local news, some of the other stations were reporting it that way and showing, I literally heard the headline, "Majority of Americans want more gun control." I heard that said on television news. If that doesn't scream liberal producer, I don't know what does. But living in Texas, I could not believe I heard that on a local newscast. And it wasn't my station at all. It wasn't anybody I'm affiliated with. It was the competition, and they're trash. Their whole family's trash, and they suck. But we're a little competitive in media. But this whole thing was just absolutely ridiculous. I heard it that way, and then there were all these anti-gun people in Washington that were like, we need this organization to come out and stop all the violence with the children. And then you've got all these celebrities coming out saying, oh, you need to watch this video. And it's like kids playing hide and seek, and then a kid gets shot or something. And I haven't even watched it because I know what it is, but all these stars are tweeting it out and telling everybody to watch it, to say, oh my God, don't let your kids play hide and seek again. So you see this video of a kid getting shot because people own guns. And it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, the whole thing is based on the premise that guns are inherently evil, that they are deadly objects in and of themselves, that if you've got one sitting in your house, somebody's going to die. And they use skewed statistics to try and prove their point, just like they do with anything else. These Democrats, they think that if they quote a study, it's correct, and they don't even look at the study that they're talking about. So they don't know the parameters. They don't know the questions, and they don't know if there's any numbers in there that are skewing it one way or the other. It's called confirmation bias. They do what they can to make the numbers work in their direction. Yes, I'm drinking water. I've been talking a lot. So one of the things that skews these stats is suicides. You know, most people that commit suicide with a gun, they do it with their own gun. And so that's where these stats on people getting injured with guns comes out and makes them look stupid. But Bloomberg went really far today. He made this statement, and I cannot make this up. I didn't pull the sound for you. I'm just going to read it because, I mean, you really don't need to hear his droll voice, and I'll just impersonate him. I am telling you that if there is a God, when I get to heaven, I'm not stopping to be interviewed. I am heading straight in. I've earned my place in heaven. It's not even close. So apparently, imposing laws on individuals that violate their rights or force them to do things against their will, imposing force on individuals, constitutes a ticket to heaven. Now, I don't know about you, but when Jesus said turn the other cheek, that implies you're not supposed to use force against another individual. I mean, Jesus didn't even save himself when he was going on the cross. I mean, when you look at the Olive Garden, or the Olive Grove where he prayed before he was taken, he had his apostles defending him with swords, and he could have made it out. And he said, no, not this. You know, live by the sword, die by the sword. Now, you can quote the Bible all over the place about, you know, if you don't have a sword, sell your clothes and buy one. So there's plenty of precedents for, you know, defending yourself in the Bible. Now, you can obviously quote turn the other cheek and try to have a philosophical debate about that. But I'm just looking at this from Bloomberg's perspective. Now, the thing about Jesus, the thing about God, about Christianity that really, really irks me, and it's how the left sees it, and it's how a lot of people on the right see it too, especially the people who are against gay marriage being legalized, the people who want blue laws, you know, liquor not being sold, dry counties. Louisiana just had a vote to keep sodomy illegal. Yes, that actually happened. And stuff like that. So it happens on both the conservative side and the liberal side. And what it is basically thinking that it is righteous to pass laws that prevent people from doing things because you think they are wrong. And so you're going to use force, the government, which is police and guns when they break these laws. You're going to use force against an individual for doing something that you think is wrong. It doesn't constitute using force against somebody else. It doesn't constitute using force in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't hurt anyone. But people pass laws anyway. People advocate laws anyway that hurt people. And that's what Mayor Bloomberg is saying is going to get him a ticket into heaven. He thinks that forcing people to do stuff or arresting people who don't listen to him is a ticket into heaven. He thinks that the man who died on the cross the Messiah, is going to welcome him with open arms for forcing people to do stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but when people look back at the Inquisition, they look at it as a dark time in Christianity. When people look back at the Crusades, generally speaking, they look back on it as a dark time. And that's because you had groups that were forcing people to do things, or killing in the name of religion because people were sinning. Now, you got a lot of people that are like this today, saying that if it ain't got Jesus, they don't want anything to do with it. And that, can mean, if you don't support Jesus in your newscast or something, if you don't have Jesus in your in your signature on your email, if whatever you're doing, you don't have Jesus in it. I mean, let's face it. Let's say you work at a plant. Let's say you're going into the plant and you're looking at pipes and doing whatever plant things it is you do. Let's say that you don't go out there and bless everything on that plant by saying a prayer over it. Does that mean you're not bringing God to work? Does that mean you're anti-God? No. It means you're out there doing your job with your God-given smarts, skills, and talents to get stuff done. Doesn't make you anti-God. So, when you say that the government can allow gay people to contract their lives to each other, that say, hey, you own half my stuff. If I die, you get all my stuff. If I'm sick, you can make my decisions. And if I own something, half it's yours, etc. Saying that a person is allowed to do that legally, or should be allowed to do that legally, does not mean that you are endorsing being gay. It doesn't mean that you think being gay is okay with Jesus. And fighting against gay people getting a legal right does not make you anti-Jesus. This whole way of thinking that Jesus somehow condones you doing things with force against other individuals through government is not okay. That is not the lessons that Jesus taught. That is not what it says in the Bible. And quite frankly, you're just a bigot. Now, I don't think any of my listeners think this way, but a lot of people out there do. A lot of people go out there and do and say a lot of crazy things in the name of Jesus, thinking that they're being righteous by forcing their stuff on other individuals. People think that, keeping individuals from smoking dope or drinking or having gay marriages somehow gets them good with God. Now, I don't know of any instance in the Bible where God slapped somebody around, where Jesus picked somebody up and smacked him in the face until they did what he said or believed what he said. That's not how God operated. God showed them joy and love and spoke to them. And that is what turned them on to the teachings of Jesus. I do not understand where individuals get the idea that Jesus wants you to go out there and force stuff on individuals. I do not understand where people get the idea that passing laws that ban things that are against the Bible are somehow in line with what Jesus teaches. That's not how it works. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because bad people chose to do bad things. If there had been a bunch of people in that town who had done good things, they would not have been destroyed. I mean, God evacuated the town. Let's be real for a minute here. God evacuated the town. He evacuated the good people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot and his family, Sarah. So think about that for a minute. Think about how God took the good and moved them out. Think about Noah and the flood. Think about Moses and the Jews being freed from Egypt. Now, when you think about these situations, at what point did God tell Moses? Did God tell Lot? Did God tell Noah to go out and start killing people? Or to put a sword to him and say, act right or I'll kill you? That's not what happened. God said, hey, you've been so good, I'm going to get you out of here. You let me handle everything else. God does not need the help of someone. Now, if you're a Christian, God does not need your help because God made the freaking universe. Do you really and honestly truly believe that the being who has the power to create the entire universe, to flood the entire planet, to destroy cities in a hail of hellfire and brimstone, to wipe entire cities off the map, to split the Red Sea, create tornadoes of flame to stop the Egyptian armies? Do you really think that the being that can do all that needs you to pass a law to keep gay people from being gay, even though they're already gay and going to do gay things, which is the real sin? The answer is no. If you believe that gay people are sinning by being gay, I mean, you're entitled to your beliefs. I don't care what you believe. But if you believe that, that does not mean you have to believe the government is going to do things or should do things to stop what they're doing. Like Louisiana. You should not believe that the government should make gay sex illegal. I mean, you're going to see a gay dude in the street holding hands with his gay partner, and the cop's going to pull him over and write him a ticket for being gay? I mean, that's effectively what these laws are. You're going to have cops do no-knock raids when they think gay sex is happening? No, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And for Mayor Bloomberg to think that forcing people to do things against their will, that spending millions of dollars to take away people's rights, preventing people from using too much salt and telling them they can't drink too much soda, is somehow in line with the teachings of Jesus, that man is nuts. He is bonkers. He is nuttier than squirrel poo. He is dumber than a box of rocks, does not know Jesus, and has not read the Bible. Because any person that's intellectually honest knows that you cannot read the teachings of Jesus and use force against other individuals. It's just the way the Bible works. It's just the way Jesus works. Learn more when we come back.
Hi, this is Jonah Goldberg from National Review, and you're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
We're back. So we've had our history lesson. We've caught up on the Bundy news. We've had our Bible lesson. Feel like we've learned a lot tonight. So what we're going to do, we're talk a little bit about the upcoming elections. Now, if you're a political file like me, if you just love politics, political theater, which I'm sure you do, you're listening to my show, 2016 is the next Super Bowl. 2016 is when the magic happens. And you've probably been enjoying the midterm campaign commercials like I have. Lord knows I enjoyed watching all the campaign commercials here in Texas and seeing a lot of the claims that people were making because, quite frankly, so many of them were obnoxious. But it's all part of the business. It's all part of the way things go here. It's how the business works. It's how individuals look at stuff. And it's, quite frankly, exciting. It's very exciting. I'm excited. You're excited. We're all excited. Now, I'm thinking that there are things that we should talk about for the 2016 race. A couple of things that have come to my attention that I want to bring up. Now, the big thing with 2016 is that we have got some contenders that keep coming out, switching out, all that kind of stuff. And the big ones that keep popping up are the ones that we've been saying would pop up the whole time. You've got a lot of the moderates saying, oh, Chris Christie has to run. He's electable. He won in a blue state. That's how it works. You've got a lot of the Tea Party people saying, Ted Cruz, we need some Cruz up in here, Cruz missile. Then you've got the kind of more moderate Tea Partiers that are, Rubio, he didn't suck that bad. And Then and it's Hispanics, lots of, Hispanic people and Hispanics. Of course, they all seem to forget that Cruz is half Hispanic, but, whatever. His name is Cruz, not Collins, but whatever. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. But what's interesting, though, is that you've got Rand Paul, who is personally my favorite. Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, 2016, hell yeah. Of course, that being said, you're not going to get the moderate Republican vote necessarily. You might have to throw some Paul Ryan in there somewhere. Something like that. Hopefully not, but you get what I mean. Now, Rand Paul and Marco Rubio are leading the pack in spending money and investing in potential campaigns. Now, that's because they've got PACs that are working for them right now. They've got PACs that are out there getting the job done, trying to get their name out there, early spending. I mean, we've got a long time off. But it's important to note that a lot of these people they're not doing the work yet. They're not laying the groundwork. But some of them are. And the two that are Rand Paul and Marco Rubio. Now, Rand PAC has spent $500,000, $580,000 in the first quarter of 2014. Rand Paul has already spent $500,000 this year. Over $500,000. Now, I mean, I think that's great. I hope he gets his name out there. I hope he makes some good points. I mean, he's not his dad, but he's still more libertarian than a lot of people. I mean, ideally, Justin Amash would be my perfect candidate, probably, but it is what it is. Now, Marco Rubio has spent $530,000 so far. So he spent over $500,000 too, but he's, $50,000 under Rand Paul. So those two are the ones that are doing the early spending. And that has a lot to do with if they were going to run, those two have the least political visibility so far. Those are the guys that they got some catching up to do with some of the more moderate guys that are making the news. Obviously, they're not the anointed ones. They're not the ones that were picked out by the media, so they're not getting the attention. And Marco Rubio, his problem is that he put his foot in his mouth hard, and they made a joke out of himself with that drink of water. And, albeit the drink of water thing was more of a ridiculous deer in the headlights moment, which is why it was funny. It wasn't that he necessarily did something wrong. The amnesty thing was where he really did something that was harmful. And, albeit his mistake was trusting that Democrats were going to stick by what they said in the Senate. He was giving people the benefit of the doubt. He was being trustworthy. To me, that says that he is gullible and can't be trusted, in my opinion. I think that Marco Rubio is gullible. I think that he can't be trusted with the presidency if he actually believes Democrats are going to keep their promises, because that's not what Democrats do. Democrats do whatever they can to get what they want, period. They think that Republicans are evil. They think that libertarians are antichrist. I mean, these Democrats are just, they don't believe in right and wrong. They don't believe in differences of opinion. They believe in their way and evil. That's it. They see everybody else as satanic, as stupid, wrong side of history, war on women. You hear the rhetoric that comes out of the Democrats. How can you trust them to do anything but scratch their own back? That's all that they're about, and pretending otherwise is lying to yourself. So I don't trust Rubio. Now, he might be good for the Hispanic vote, and that'd be all right for a VP run, but personally I think he needs to spend some more time in the Senate growing up. Whereas Rand Paul, I would be perfectly fine with him running and winning and then going back to the Senate, which has been done before. There are people that have won the presidency and then gone back to the Senate or the House. Forget which one did it, and I don't care to look it up. But I know it's happened before. It's presidented, so it wouldn't be a first. And quite frankly, we need it. Now, there are two people, notably, who have not started spending money yet, albeit it's probably because they don't have to, because the media has coddled and anointed them. They've christened them the 2016 ticket, so that still remains to be seen. And those two people are Chris Christie and Jeb Bush. Neither one of them have super PAC support. Neither one of them are spending money, but both of them appear to be campaigning, so to speak. Now, Chris Christie, it is to note that he's the president of the Republican Governors Organization. Personally, I think he's a chud. I think he needs to stay in New Jersey and keep living off the waste of New York City. And he should just stay there and not go anywhere else, because Chris Christie is a selfish politician, and he is someone that has no problem working with Democrats. And I know a lot of people on the right want, quote unquote, to get stuff done. They want laws to be passed. They want bills to go through. And it just shows a lack of understanding in how the government works. Anytime I hear somebody talk about how Christie is more electable because he can appeal to blue voters, or, you know, how he'll work with Democrats and we can't have another know-nothing Congress, you just want to shake these people and try to wake them up, because, I mean, isn't enough stuff illegal already? Like, don't we have enough problems in this country without dealing with Democrats getting their way with a Republican president? I mean, what's the point of electing a Republican president if he's just going to work with the Democrats? Because, I mean, you hear about this all the time. You hear it's better to get half a loaf of bread than no bread. It's better to compromise than to get nothing. I disagree. It is better for government to do nothing than for them to pass Democrat legislation. Because look at it this way. Anytime Democrat legislation gets through, it becomes enhanced in the future. So when you get Republicans that are like, oh, well, we're, going to get what we want too, in part. That's not true. Because any true Republican knows, any true conservative knows that Medicare and Medicaid need to be phased out. They know that Social Security needs to be phased out. They know that income taxes need to be phased out. Republicans that are big government and don't support this stuff should not be elected anywhere ever. And it's unfortunate because you get a lot of talking heads on the right that disagree with me, and, well, they're stupid. But not only that, they make a mess of things, and they convolute the conversation. They make it to where you don't hear this stuff. And Jeb Bush is, he's pro-amnesty, and let's face it, if amnesty goes through, it'll allow brothers and cousins and mothers and grandparents and stuff to go through. It will galvanize the Democrat vote in the nation. You will have an overwhelming surge of blue votes in Texas, for example, and it will never be a red state again, because 8 out of 10 Hispanics vote Democrat. 8 out of 10, 80%. So when you get, 30 million people once, all the extended family comes into America, when you get 30 million people that just come into the country, which is, already hurting for unemployment anyway, they're going to all vote Democrat, and especially the border states, you're going to see Republicans get phased out. And that's just disheartening. I mean, it's disgusting. And Ann Coulter wrote a column about this on townhall.com. Which I peruse from time to time, mostly because Sowell writes there regularly, and Thomas Sowell is a genius. But Ann Coulter wrote this article, and I took issue with some of it. And I don't want to get into all of it yet because I have not fully fleshed out some of it, so I'm going to leave that for next time. But she said, anyone opposing an incumbent Republican for any reason other than amnesty is a fraud or an idiot. Now, arguably, Ann Coulter's an idiot herself sometimes, many times, such as at the Liberty Conference in D.C. with Stossel. She made herself to be an idiot. She said, conservatives who ignore amnesty while carping about the debt ceiling, TARP, the internet tax bill, or Benghazi are too stupid to help the country. Now, if she doesn't understand why more taxes, why a commander-in-chief abandoning people, military personnel, and ambassadors in Benghazi are stupid, are illegal, are bad commander-in-chief, or why the debt ceiling is important, she is too stupid to make comments of any validity. Now, normally, I defend Ann Coulter and what she says because sometimes she makes good points, and anybody who pisses off a Democrat is usually somebody I can call my friend. But with this whole harping on immigration thing, she really just went too far, and here's where she goes. Suppose the Senate had passed a bill that would cut Texas out of the Union. Would that get your attention, fake Tea Partiers? Without Texas, Republicans would immediately lose 38 electoral votes, 2 senators, and 24 members of Congress. Democrats would only lose 12 House seats. She says basically that's what amnesty would do. It would neuter Texas. And I agree with her. I agree that passing amnesty would do that. However, to say that these other issues are not just as important makes her insane. Now, I agree that the midterm elections need to be about gutting the way amnesty is being done, because there's no way in hell amnesty or any immigration program whatsoever can go through with Democrats holding the Senate and a Democrat president. Now, I think, honestly, Obama will play ball to save face if Republicans were to control both the House and Senate and pass an immigration bill. I think Obama would get behind something like that. I don't know that he would enforce it properly, but I do think he would get behind it. I think he would probably find a way to make it work, mainly to save face for the Democrats and clear the way for Hillary in the next run, because I do think if she doesn't win in 2016, she'll run again. I think she'll probably pull a third time's the charm, because let's face it, that Clinton has not stolen enough stuff from the White House just yet. But Coulter really upsets me, saying that she wants, she thinks that people who are focusing on anything but immigration are idiots and can't help the country. She's entitled to her opinion, but on this, she is way off the base. If you look at how the economy has fared, if you look at the way Bush handled things when he was in office, the government bailouts, the stimulus packages, the forming of the NSA programs that have now led to the NSA spying, you can't help but see that her arguments on what the government is doing or should be doing, what have you, are nuts. You can't focus on one issue like this. You can't put immigration as your number one issue in the instance of 2016 when there's so many important things on the table. Now, I would agree that in the 2014 race, the midterm elections, I would argue that she is correct in that instance. I would agree that, people winning primaries against, amnesty Republicans would have been a great thing to get into. I agree there. But as far as, that being the big issue in 2016, making sure that the amnesty is the big thing and that anybody else is stupid, no, I'm sorry, but she needs to take a back seat and let real people talk it out. All right, that's all we're going to talk about this evening. I hope you guys have had a great week. I am Dustin Hoyt. This is America Our Way. You're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio. Be sure to check me out on Twitter at America Our Way. Be sure to like the Facebook page, facebook.com/America Our Way, and I will see you next time.